and ensure a safe and secure environment for our citizens.
Who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Juncker? It all sounded wonderful. Don't worry about Brexit. We're moving on to build our European state. There's no problem. But 8 months on, things are a little different. Why? Because not only is Brexit happening and Article 50 on the verge of being triggered, but we're seeing Eurosceptic opinion growing in virtually every single country in the European Union, and there are some very crucial elections coming up this year. And that's why now Mr. Juncker has laid out 5 possible scenarios for the future of the European Union. One is to carry on pretty much as it is. The second is to go back to it being just about the single market and not much more else. The third is that for those who want to do more, you haven't all got to move together at the same pace. Another idea is to do less but do it more efficiently. And the last option, which is the one he really favours, is doing much more together and having a United States of Europe and an army and everything else. Why is he doing this when he was so defiant after Brexit? It's because of these elections. It's because they're running scared. Frankly, I think what he's putting to the people here amounts to a con job. He's pretending that we could row back on some of the centralising tendencies of the Union, and he's doing it because he really is terrified of what's going to happen later this month in the Netherlands and, of course, heading on to France and Germany later in the year. So please, get involved. Tell me what you think. Call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me at 84850. You can tweet at LBC using the hashtag Farage and LBC, and you can comment on the Facebook page, and you can watch the show live. And I wonder myself whether what we've seen here from Mr. Juncker actually is a sign genuinely of weakness. Because I've never, ever before heard him talking in any way before about rowing back. It's always been about moving on to a full political union. He's always been completely unapologetic about the whole thing. It's been British politicians that have tended to pretend, oh, it's not really going to be too political. And it's been Juncker all the way through that has talked about European armies and everything else. And I'm just thinking to myself, they're in trouble. I wonder what Robert, our first caller this evening from Medway. Robert, what do you think of Mr. Juncker's 5-point plan? And can the EU survive Brexit? Robert, good evening.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. Robert, fire away.
I think it's probably going to last for another 10, 15 years, but I think a few countries may leave in the next, year or two. I am a fellow UKIPper.
Right.
Anyway, so that's kind of my thoughts on that. Have you seen the petition about the Lords thing?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have.
It's just hit over 70,000, so...
well, I mean, of course there are going to be people unhappy with last night. But Robert, just quickly, you think the whole thing will break up. I have to say, I think I'd rather take the same view. Which country is first after Britain, in your opinion?
The way it's looking with the elections with Mary Le Pen, it probably will be France.
Well,
and that will be the most damaging factor because obviously one of the founding members leaving the union is,
I think, Robert, that would be the end of the game, the end of the Peer show, because actually it was getting France and Germany together, after 3 horrible wars. And by the way, getting them together to be friendly and trade with each other was an utterly sensible thing to have done. But if France moves out of the European Union, I would say, Robert, the whole thing is over. I thank you. I wonder what Martin in Glasgow thinks. Can the EU survive, Martin?
Well, I hope not, Nigel. And to be honest with you, how people can't see the lunatics aren't running the asylum, I will never know how any of these Remainers can possibly support this nonsense. It's been going on for absolute years, lunacy, and I just hope the French people and others in Europe decide to take it upon themselves to see through all this rubbish and vote the way they should be voting and get themselves out. It's an absolute disgrace. And I'll tell you another thing, Nigel. Sorry, I'm not digressing here, but I wish to goodness Theresa May would get this Article 50 or whatever it's called going, Because every day I look at the news, there's somebody taking something to court, the Lords are doing this. It's been a disgrace how long this has taken. It really
8 months. 8 months, Martin.
8 months.
You know, yeah. No, I agree with you. But I'm very surprised to hear your tone, because you come from Glasgow. Alex Salmon told me that everybody in Scotland thinks the EU is absolutely fantastic and that the Scots would like to leave the United Kingdom and join the European Union, sign up to the euro and to free movement of people. I mean, Martin, what's gone wrong with you?
Well, the point is, Nigel, does he know every person that lives in Scotland their views? No, he doesn't.
No.
There was 1 million of us, or thereabouts, that did vote for Brexit.
Mm-hmm.
And also, what I find absolute lunacy as well, and I'll use that word, you want to get out of the United Kingdom, I'm talking about SNP, and then they want to get into Europe. Now, the reason why they want to do that, because they know somebody will be there to bail them out if they're in trouble. Because if they leave the United Kingdom, where the finances going to be? It's an absolute disgrace, and if I was living in England and if I was English, I'd feel absolutely appalled and disgusted the way they're obviously being anti-English. That's what it is.
Well, they have been anti-English, but they're also conning the Scottish electorate. They call themselves the Scottish Nationalist Party. I suggest, Martin, they rebrand themselves as the European Regionalist Party, because that's what they want Scotland to be, effectively a tiddler in the European Union. And I must say, it's good to get your call. On Facebook, Simon says, ask him why he's repeatedly lied about the formation of a European state army. Well, Simon, it's not Juncker that's lied. Some might suggest that when he was the Deputy Prime Minister and when Nick Ferrari invigilated a debate between the two of us back in 2014, that it was Nick Clegg who was less than honest. When I talked about this European army, Cleggers said it was a fantasy. Well, now we know that wasn't the case. Yaroslav says on Facebook, the EU will do well with the UK out. Maybe. They'll miss our money, though, won't they? Jeffrey says they're all worried about their pensions at the EU. Well, I'm sure they are. Frank says Juncker is running scared and he can see it collapsing all around him. I'm loving every minute of it, says Frank. I wonder what Brian in Crawley thinks. Can the EU survive Brexit and the elections this year?
Absolutely not, Nigel. Well, for one, I just really do hope that all those that are up for election, Le Pen, Geert Wilders, all those people that are wishing to destroy this system actually get in. And our Prime Minister should do us the honour by saying this is a waiting game. It's, at the moment, because we're not getting anything out of her about the EU, and she knows it's a waiting game. And I can't wait until those dates are finally up.
Well, you're right that the names you mentioned do want to destroy the system, although I have to say I might express some other reservations about elements of their policies. I'm not 100% in favour of the Dutch fella, particularly with regard to Islam, where he appears to want to go to war with it. But the point is, Brian, Euroscepticism is growing absolutely everywhere, and the British... So you feel that Theresa May's been too hesitant, yeah?
Yes, she has, and I think... she should say we have to wait here until all the other countries have had a proper election. Otherwise,
Well, one country, Brian, that is having an election is, and we're going to my next caller, which is David in Cannes in the south of France. David, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. It's nice to speak to you. Very nice to speak to you. Well, as you know, France is coming up to the elections, and at the moment. The Front National are head and shoulders above anybody else. But I'm afraid that what will happen, which happened last election, is that 3 or 4 parties are going to gang up on her, and she will lose the election that way. As you know what it's like in France, I believe.
No, I do. But, David, I mean, in the past, they've always said, look, whilst you may agree with some of the rhetoric of Marine Le Pen and the Front National, they are a dangerous extremist party. I wonder whether she has now managed to separate herself from the extremism which undoubtedly has been in the National Front for the last 40 years.
Well, I think she has, because she's kicked out her father, hasn't she?
I know. I mean, I must say, David, I think she's different. Give me a prediction. Is Le Pen going to win?
I hope so. Let me say I hope so. You know, Nigel, I worked in the EU. I worked for the... this is going to make you laugh. I worked for the French representation to the EU because I'm a dual national.
Yep.
I'm British, but I became French because I'm married to a French lady, and my 2 sons are dual nationals also. But I wanted Britain to get out because I know what I know what it's like because I live in France. The mass unemployment that there is in the northern parts of France is unbelievable, Nigel.
And let alone, David, Greece and Italy and Portugal and Spain. It's not working, is it? David, thank you for your call. Most of you so far think it's probably all over, although I've got one here, a text. Why do you even care what the European Union does going forward? I would have loved to be part of a European superstate, says Reese. Jean-Claude Juncker is on the back foot. He's giving us a sort of multiple-choice future for the European Union, including some concessions that maybe it would go back to being not much more than a single market. Truth of it is, option number 1 is carrying on. I would say it's a bit more like carry on. Do you remember that scene in Carry On Up the Khyber when Sid James, who is the Brit in charge of the North West Passage, Sir Sidney Rough Diamond, is there having dinner with his wife and guests, and the shells are landing in the ceiling and there are spears coming through the window, and it's clear the whole thing is a disaster. And they're all going to get killed, but they pretend, being Brits, that there's nothing wrong at all and continue eating their dinner. And I think that's what's happening in the European Union. Brexit was the first big break. We've got major elections coming up next year. I think they're deluding themselves if they really think the peoples of Europe want to be governed by Jean-Claude Juncker and the unelected gang in Brussels. That's my view. I wonder what Terence in Aberdeen thinks.
Hey, Nigel. I've got 2 quick points just to mention. I think the real catalyst about the downfall of the EU will be, number 1, Professor Ted Malloch, the potential US ambassador for the EU. I mean, regardless of whatever happens in the elections, worst-case scenario, if they all lose, the EU will still function. But I think with him being the focal point of the American people, and particularly Donald Trump, he will be really pushing Donald Trump's agenda into the EU. I think he will be the real catalyst. Just
some explanation, Terence, for those listening that don't know. Professor Ted Malloch has been much touted, as becoming America's ambassador to the European Union. And he appeared on a late-night TV show. And he was asked about the European Union. He said, well, I helped to bring about the end of the Soviet Union. Perhaps I can do the same for another union, which I think is what Terence is referring to. And your second point, Terence?
The second point, everyone's a bit cheesed off with Theresa May, quite rightly. As a fellow Brexiteer, I'm incredibly annoyed until I remember there's a bit of history. The Parliament Act 1949. I'm not sure if there are many viewers out there who know of it, but Tony Blair put it to excellent use when he was pushing his agenda for the Iraq War. I think Theresa May should do the exact same thing. What it basically does is it circumvents completely the rule of the House of Lords and just brings power back to the House of Commons. And I think that's why she, is keeping the cards close to her chest and sticking to the timetable of the 14th, 15th of March to enact Brexit.
Well, Terence, whatever we can debate what powers should be in the House of Lords, what powers should be in the House of Commons. My point is that a referendum is a time when those in Westminster say, no, you make the decision. And the government promised us, Terence, that whatever we said in that referendum would be enacted. And yet since then, we've had court cases, we've had debates and votes in the House of Commons, and indeed, it's going on in the House of Lords. Terence, I thank you for your call. Your tweets coming in. Did Juncker just say the EU makes Europe safer? He did. The UK should create a parallel European Union in the image of our Anglo-Saxon pragmatism, common sense and fair play, says Ernie. Well, Ernie, I have to say that once this European Union is finished, which it will be, I do think there's an argument for a very constructive Europe where individual democratic nation-states work together, trade together, have reciprocity with each other on a whole range of things. But the idea that those ancient, in many cases, nation-states of Europe, some of them newer, but they should give up the ability to run their own lives to somebody else won't, in my view, ever work. On Facebook, Damien says, I'm British and I want us to have a strong voice and influence in Europe. You don't do that by leaving, in my opinion. Well, Damien, we've been told for 40 years we'd have this amazing influence in Europe. I've yet to see it in my 20 years nearly in the European Parliament. Rachel says the EU is a sinking ship. They are trying so hard to keep their head above water. That's exactly, Rachel, I think, what they are doing. But I wonder what Andrew in Winsford thinks. Andrew, good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Nigel. Hi, it's great to chat. I think it's basically it is pretty much going to fall apart, and the next big northern country that drops out, hopefully it'll be France. With a bit of luck. But I think one of the biggest disgraces is the fact that what you're looking at is who's going to be in charge to actually give people the option. It's not will people want to leave, it's will they be given the option to leave.
Well, now look, and I'm not going to do this as a cheerleader for Marine Le Pen. I'll do it completely neutrally. But what Le Pen wants to do is she wants to win the presidential election, go to Brussels with some demands, and whether those demands are met or not, then put that to the French people in a referendum. That is what she's proposing to do, Andrew.
Yeah.
Does that sound a reasonable... does that sound to you to be a reasonable way ahead?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's reasonable for all other countries, but if the right person doesn't win the election, then they simply don't give them the option to leave. So they might actually not want the person that's going to win the person that's going to win the election. They might want them to win it, but they might not want to be in the EU. But they can't have both in certain circumstances.
Well,
for most countries.
Well, there is a compromise here, which is Marine Le Pen makes the last round, which looks likely because it's a two-stage process. Whoever she's up against, whether it's Macron or Fillon, who are the two other front runners, maybe if it's close, she'll shift them into promising a referendum. So she might win this, whether she wins or not. After all, it was Cameron that promised a referendum to try and get me and UKIP off his back that led to the referendum. So there's more than one way, as they say, Andrew, to skin a cat. Thank you for your call. Alex in High Wycombe, is the European Union doomed, as so many seem to say, or has it got a bright future?
Well, I think it has got a future because the players in Europe, and the countries I know best are Holland and Germany. I can't see any way that they would want to break it up. In Holland, Geert Wilders is doing well, but the other parties say we're not going to govern with you, so he'll be on his own and he won't get a majority.
Well, that may be true, Alex. That may well be true, but just remember that last April there was a referendum in the Netherlands, yeah?
Yeah.
And it was a referendum on whether the European Union should do a deal with the Ukraine to effectively start a process where Ukraine would join the European Union.
Yeah, but Alex, that was all about Ukraine, wasn't it?
But here's my point, Alex, just very quickly. Here's my point, is the voters were overwhelmingly against it in that referendum, and yet what have the Dutch government done? They've ignored them, and they're continuing. So can you see why Eurosceptic opinion in the Netherlands is broader than just Geert Wilders?
Yeah, but they had a plane shot down over Ukraine, and I think they really messed up on the rescue process, and I think that had a lot to do with it. But can I move on to Germany? In Germany, There's absolutely no way that they will step away from Europe because their whole foreign policy since the Second World War is about creating bridges and wanting to create... What the Germans want more than anything else is an area of peaceful stability in Europe. I know the papers here write about, they just want our money and that. And yes, it does. They do extremely well in the export market, not only here, by the way. But the core belief of the ordinary Germans, and I know quite a lot, is that they just want an area of peaceful stability. And for them, that means working together with their neighbours, because they realise the opposite of that, and we have seen little bits of it with the Alternative for Deutschland, is that you go back to nationalism, and we know what that leads to in Germany.
Well,
and they don't want that.
Well, that depends, Alex, whether it is... that depends whether Germany is democratic or not. It's because that democratic system of Weimar broke down that Hitler was able to do what he did. And yes, you're right, there is a spectre of history that hangs over Germany. I don't for one moment think that this year Germany is even going to debate. AfD may, but they're the new challenger party. But no, whoever wins, whether it's Merkel or Schulz, is going to be pro the European Union. But I would suggest to you, Alex, that whilst the Germans may say that, there are other countries around Europe who say this. They say one of the primary reasons for European Union was to control Germany and to stop it being too dominant. How ironic that it's now a German-dominated Europe. So there is, Alex, bad feeling across much of the Mediterranean about this issue.
But isn't it funny, though, even with the Greeks and all their problems, and you know, it was all on the news, they didn't seem to be actually want to come out of the EU. You know, that was the ironic thing. So what they're actually saying is, we've got our problems, but we're still Europeans, and we want to actually work together. And
well, I think the Greeks, in my view, Alex, have got Stockholm syndrome. But look, I take your points on Germany. They're well made. They are well made. Germany, there is not going to be a serious debate about leaving the European Union, but there is in the Netherlands, and there is in France, and even in Italy, we're now beginning to see that kind of debate happening. So, Alex, I thank you. You're certainly right. Germany is not ready for this. On Facebook, Tom says, only when we have left will we be able to laugh at carry on up the EU. Paul says within 5 years the EU will involve Germany and a few ex-Soviet nations. You may be right, Paul. Others may, Denmark, very Eurosceptic. The Netherlands, very Eurosceptic. Andrew says on Facebook, the EU leaders should be planning for the peaceful return to nation-state democracy, not trying to cling on in desperation. And Andrew, that was the big message that came out of 2016. Brexit, Trump and other events. The nation-state made a big comeback in 2016. Jean-Claude Juncker knows that, which is why he's putting forward this plan today. I'm live here from New York. Can the European Union survive Brexit? The election's coming up this year, and it's Mr Juncker with his 5-point plan simply trying to pull the wool over the eyes of EU citizens. But before that, I just have to comment on the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell's statement today that Labour would force anyone earning more than £1 million a year to make their tax returns public. The reason for doing this is so that tax dodgers have no hiding place. Well, I'm not sure about that. Surely there must be plenty of people on low incomes who evade tax, not just people on high incomes who evade tax. In fact, the more you earn, the more vulnerable you are to HMRC coming and investigating you. No, Mr McDonnell, this isn't about tax evasion. This is about pure jealousy. This is about hating people who have done well. I'm surprised you don't actually say that maybe mobs should gather in the streets outside their houses and throw stones at their windows. Because if you do this to people, you will actually make them vulnerable to public attack. I think it's disgraceful that Labour are going down this anti-success, jealousy route. I feel quite strongly about it. And if you do, Clive Bull will be picking up this debate at 8 p.m. this evening. But for now, we're back to Mr Juncker. The European Union, can it survive, or is it going to prove itself to be resilient indeed? I don't know. James in Andover, what do you think?
Hi, Nigel.
Hello. What do you think? I mean, is the EU going to survive, James?
We can survive outside. Absolutely, we can survive outside the EU. Absolutely. Yep. That's unquestionable. Do we want to be outside the EU? I doubt it. I'm a 30-year-old graduate. I see myself as a European citizen. I feel like we have progressed so much over the last 30 years with free trade, free movement, and now it's just like we're putting the brakes on it. We're putting an anchor on our progress. Why? Why would we do this?
James, I'm talking to you from New York, where we have a new president in this country, in America, who is very keen to do a special deal relationship with the United Kingdom. Indeed, the Australians want to do this. The Canadians want to do this. There's some interest, I believe, from India to do this. I mean, isn't the point that Brexit, James, wasn't turning our backs on the world? It was making ourselves able to engage with bigger parts of it.
But we're already engaged. We live in a multinational society, an international society, whereby, we're already engaged. We are already engaged with those countries.
But we can engage. But we can engage more closely. We can engage more closely, James, being in control of our own trade policy.
Yeah. So yes, I'll agree with you at that level. Absolutely. But I say. We should be at this together. We really should. I feel like I'm an international citizen in that sense, a European citizen, and I feel we're going backwards. We really are. I feel like the Lords, saying the other night that, they're going to be keeping free movement. It was excellent, because we need that. We need that to grow our society. And anybody who thinks we don't and we should shut the borders tomorrow is mad, and they're kidding.
Oh, James. No, James. We've been growing our society all right. Oh, yes. We've been growing it by 500,000 people every year, which is why many people can't get on the housing ladder, can't get a GP appointment, and have got little prospect of ever owning their own home. Isn't that the problem?
I doubt that's very much to do with the housing market, Nigel, really.
Oh, it is?
Really. I doubt that very much.
Well, I'll tell you what, James. I'll tell you what, James. Hang on. Then I will let you come back. But let me just make this point to you. To satisfy current levels of immigration, we have to build a new dwelling every 4 minutes. One every 4 minutes, just to cope with the current inflow of people.
Nigel, that is going to be honest, we need to grow our housing stock regardless, whether we have immigration or not. We are organically grown. The fact of the matter is we are not building enough houses, full stop. Now, the fact that immigrants are coming over and taking our houses, taking honest working British people's houses, is just, it's not true. It's absolutely not true. And the fact that, you're kind of like, you're producing that is just, it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
James, do you know what, James? Much as I'm enjoying this, you and I are rerunning the referendum. And what we're trying to do tonight, to ask, will the European Union survive Brexit and the upcoming elections this year? Yes or no?
Yes, we will survive.
When you say we, you do feel European, don't you?
I do feel European, but yes, of course the UK is going to survive. The idea, the notion that...
No, but I mean, is the European Union going to survive, James?
I hope so. I absolutely
You hope so. Fine. James, I thank you. James, who feels that he is an EU citizen, and that's fine. He's absolutely entitled to have that view. I suspect, though, that it is very much a minority view. I don't know. What does Ben in Hemel Hempstead think? Ben, good evening.
Good evening. Hi, Nigel. Thank you so much for taking my call. Yeah, well, I'm a French citizen. Moved to the UK 2-3 years ago.
Yep.
And I never signed in to be a member in the EU. And when I speak with my father, who is 83, they said, we never signed for that. We never voted for that. Now, the EU, they create a lot of rules and directives as they like to control the people. And if you say anything, you are racist or you are discriminating against the other nations. But we are not. We wanted to be a part of people that got the same values, the same culture, the same economy. They flowed all here and to France, and that there is an imbalance in the EU. Some countries from the Union Soviet now, their economy compared to France or here is not the same. So definitely they have to come here. And
well, in fact, Ben, I mean, Ben, aren't there about 300,000 French people that have come to England in the last, I think, 20 years, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it's not... Yeah, we don't really need to come here because we got the same economy. Our economy as well, we only change some scales between each other and Germany, Holland. So it's not, we don't kind of leave everything and come back here because there's no works or something like that.
Ben, let me ask you, would it be a good thing if Marine Le Pen became the next French president?
I would love to, but she needs to take some advice from some wise people.
Okay, Ben, thank you. No, thank you. You're backing Le Pen. It's very interesting, and thank you. Your texts and tweets coming in. A tweet here: Mr. Juncker needs to get his head out of the clouds. The EU is doomed, says Brendan. Hi, Nigel. Carry on, Juncker. He just wants power, not peace, says Tina. Tony Blair said a couple of years ago, the EU used to be about peace. It's now about power. I think he was right. I kind of understand why people want us to leave the EU, but I can't grasp why people want it to fail entirely, says Andy. Well, I guess, Andy, if the argument is we should leave and get our country back and our democracy back and our borders back, why on earth wouldn't we want our friends in Europe to have the same thing? On Facebook, Seema says, you do realise that the UK are part of Europe, Mr Farage. I thought we were an island. There we go. Mike says, we have not progressed. We have been suppressed. Well... And Tad says, I believe the Netherlands will be leaving the EU next and France will follow. I wonder what Evan in Slough makes of this. Evan, can the EU survive Brexit and these elections this year?
Hi, Farage. I definitely think the EU will survive. I would also go on to say that I don't think it's good for the UK to be gloating over the EU and what's going to happen to the EU. I don't think it's healthy for us. I think it's beneath us to do that. But more importantly, if the EU were to fail, the net result would be very bad for the UK. I mean, even NATO is speculating that if it were to happen, Russia could become significantly more aggressive. We could look potentially at a depression, a global depression or global recession setting in. It would be really bad given how much...
Oh, hang on, Evan. Hang on.
From the financial crisis.
Just one second.
Sure.
I was listening to that Osborne fellow, our Chancellor, and the chap that's still the Governor of the Bank of England, Carney, and they were telling us that if we voted for Brexit, the housing market would collapse. There would be, sort of plague and pestilence, and maybe even a swarm of locusts would hit the country. And none of it's happened, Evan, has it?
Absolutely, that's a very good point. But the important thing to understand is that when the pound diminishes in value, what you get is a temporary effect of a boost in purchase. For example, if you make something cheaper, people will buy more of it. People buy more of it, you get more demand, so we sell more. But that causes inflation, and as inflation sets in, then you start to have all the negative effects. So you get this brief boom effect. It's like when the governments would have an election, they would start lowering interest rates to engineer a boom. And then you get the bust.
I do understand that, Evan. I do understand that. You know, I worked in financial markets, commodities for years, but I would make this point to you as well, and to everybody. The idea that the pound has only fallen since the Brexit vote is baloney. It fell far more in the years preceding the Brexit vote than it did afterwards. I think actually the pound was grossly overvalued for years, primarily because of vast amounts of money coming in to the London and South East property market.
I understand your reasoning there, but I mean the key point there is that the predictions for the market by experts on the UK economy is still there. It's just a temporary effect of how it unwinds. Well, but if you look, for example, at the US, you're saying the US will have a new dedicated trade agreement with the US potentially, but a Brexit at all costs. You know, where we might get, essentially, they reckon a dedicated trade agreement with the US will be worth 0.3% additional trade, because our current trade agreement with the US is extremely good under WTO. It's extremely effective.
Evan,
just like
Evan,
the rest
we
of our
can
trade
do.
across the world.
Evan, we're going to be free to do trade deals with everybody. Listen, I thank you. Great conversation. And the Brexit debate goes on because Gina Miller, remember her, the Ramona-in-chief, she hasn't given up. She's considering yet another court case, unless Parliament gets a full vote at the end of the process. Gina Miller, the last opinion poll says 68% of Britons now accept the result of the referendum and want the government to get on with it, if only they were left to do so. But we're discussing not just Brexit tonight, but the bigger theme. It appears that Jean-Claude Juncker is on the back foot. He's trying to pretend to the voters in Europe that possibly he might give them back a few powers. He's doing it to try and stop Marine Le Pen and others winning dramatic elections this year. And I'm just asking the question, can the European Union survive? And I wonder what Kieran in Acton makes of that.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi there.
I very much doubt they'll survive. You know, we've got Donald Trump on our side now, which will help with negotiations. I saw that Donald might also put on restrictions with regards to cars being made in Germany or something, so that I suppose they can bring some business over to America. That puts us in a strong position. I think when we're in negotiations with the European Union, I think they'll start breaking down. You know, countries like Germany, I saw in the paper the other day, they're going to foot our bill. I mean, how are they going to be able to do that? It's crazy.
It was interesting, Kieran. One of the earlier callers said that some of us were gloating about the failure of the European Union, but I'm not gloating about the misery in Greece and Italy and Spain and Portugal and Cyprus and Malta. I'm not gloating about the mass unemployment these failed policies have caused. I believe, Kieran, not only will we be better off outside the European Union, I think Europe and European nations will be better off outside the European Union.
100%. I mean, the diversity and the scale of the countries. How can you manage everyone with one stick? And when you put 27 countries in the room, how are they supposed to agree? All of them have different backgrounds, different goals. You know, it's impossible. It's a failed thing. Actually, you're one of the most, you're the politician of our time, and it's common sense. It's common
sense. It's not rocket science, Kieran, is it? People want to live in nations. They want to vote for their rulers. They want to sack their rulers. They want to live at peace with their neighbours, but not be governed by this mob in Brussels. Kieran, thank you for your call. I agree with you 100%. Your texts and tweets. A text here. Why does Farage always have to be so blooming negative about the EU, says Larry. I'm being negative, Larry, because it isn't working. It isn't working for anyone other than those who are employed by it. Yes, I'm one of those. I've been employed by it, but I am the turkey that did vote for Christmas. I wonder what Robin in Olney thinks. Robin, can the EU survive its current crisis?
No, Nigel, simply because it was doomed from the get-go. It has an anthem, it has a flag. It's turning into an empire. We know what happens to all empires. There's a rise and fall throughout history. No empire has survived. That's it in a nutshell. We want to be out of it to avoid the fallout, and I think we're doing the right thing.
Yes, I do too, Robin, but the point is, will the whole thing survive, or could it end in complete collapse and perhaps, some sort of financial disaster of some kind?
Well, what I think we've done is helped some of the other nations out. I spend every week in Europe, mainly in Germany, and when I'm first greeted as an Englishman, the word Brexit comes up, and when you start to intellectualize the whole thing, everybody agrees that reform is needed. It was going in the wrong direction, and in the end, the conversation turns into, well, you've probably helped us out because you've defibrillated what was a dying heart. So,
well, this is in a sense, Robin, this is what Juncker's trying to do, isn't it? He's trying to say, look, there is a multiple choice here, and one of them is we do hand back some powers. The question is whether they actually mean it. Robin, your view is succinct and clear, and I thank you. But, those of you out there that think the EU will survive, that it's still a good thing, please do let me know. And we're going to Spain to ask Tina, what is going to happen to the European Union, Tina? You're there in Spain, youth unemployment rates high, things not going that well, or am I wrong?
No, things are going dreadfully here, and I think the whole economy is held together by sticking plasters.
Whereabouts in Spain are you, Tina?
Sorry?
Whereabouts in Spain are you?
Granada.
Granada, yeah. So things are bleak, yeah?
They are. At the end of the day, I think the Spanish will hold on as long as they can because obviously they get EU grants and they seem to think that money is coming from the EU rather than from their own coffers. But I think if you look at Spain, you look at Portugal, you look at Italy and their economies, I think Italy's going to go this year. And I think unless they're allowed to revert back to their own currencies, I have no idea how they're going to get out of this mess.
Tina, I agree with you completely, and I think you're right. I think that in terms of feeling sceptical about the entire project, Italy is a lot further down that track than Spain. There are many in Spain who feel they've derived benefit from the European Union, but that was until they joined the euro, and the euro has been a great big mistake for Spain. And you're right about EU money. There's no such thing as EU money. It comes from taxpayers, a lot of it from us, and it's the old joke, isn't it, that you go on the toll road in Spain and they ask you to pay the fee at the end of a journey, and you say, no, I'm British, we've paid already. Tina, thank you for your stark analysis. Toby on Facebook says, who is Juncker? Where did he come from? And who in this country voted for him? Well, I think I said that once to Herman Van Rompuy. Who are you? Because I genuinely barely heard of the bloke. Mr Juncker was, for 19 years, the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. He is a successful politician. He won 5 general elections. Luxembourg may be small, but you've still got to be, quite an operator to win 5 elections. He is dedicated to the European project, perhaps for a very good reason. His father, in 1940, was conscripted into the Wehrmacht when the Germans invaded, sent off to fight on the Eastern Front and was wounded. And so Juncker believes that because of the horrors that happened, along the Rhine with the Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, the Second World War, that Europe is the solution. And I've had this debate with him. And I would say, Mr Juncker, of course, getting people together in a cooperative, package to work together, to trade together, was the right thing to do. But to push it to a full political union, where you take away from people their democratic rights and their identity, is a disastrous mistake. So that's who he is. I disagree with Juncker completely although I have to say he's quite a laugh to be with. And Dave says, I wish people would try to be positive about the future. Dave, I'm being positive. Break up this union, bring back independent states across Europe, and we'll get on really well together. I wonder what Marcus in Swiss Cottage makes of this great debate of our times.
Hi, I do believe that the European Union will survive, which I'm going to explain momentarily, but I just wanted to comment on some of your callers' emphasis on Trump. He's in power for 3 years and 11 months and counting. The next administration could easily dismantle those agreements or special contracts we would have with them, or even rescind the existing ones. We don't know what another administration could bring in. Because of his age, I doubt he'll go for an 8-year term. And I think
he's pretty, Marcus, I can tell you, he's pretty fit.
Yeah, but I'm just looking at the temper of America. I mean, it would be quite astounding if he did what Franklin Delano Roosevelt did during World War II, their special war powers. But Trump says he's going to put America first. That will hurt our economy as well. How many Bentleys and Aston Martins are going to sell to them if they're going to be putting their own brand forward above our brands? And some of them are having just bring it to Europe now. Some people have been having a poke at Germany, and I think that Germany's done very well. They'll do very well inside the European Union or outside the European Union. It's in their genes. They've always had a very special relationship with the state. So I suppose the European Union fits well with their psyche. Yeah. Whereas we don't seem to have that same mentality as them. But their success speaks for itself. They're doing something right. They perform better than us.
Marcus, they have. The trouble is, the Germans could be the last man standing, couldn't they? Because so many other countries are on the verge now of considering leaving, Marcus. Surely that's right.
Yeah, but that's because we're, in my opinion, I think our mentality is a bit like elastic bands. You go in one direction to the Conservative, and then after a generation, it swings back to the other way. Well, and then
Marcus,
and it'll swing back round again.
Marcus, it won't, mate. Thank you. It won't. We've made our minds up. There is a big change, and my final thought is that this 5-point plan from Mr. Juncker is a con job. He's no intention of doing anything than carrying on to build a full political union. There are big elections coming up in the wake of Brexit. He's running scared of them. The truth is, the European Union project is dying before our eyes. It doesn't work, and people don't want it. Britain, we're now in a lifeboat. We've got off the Titanic. I think many other countries will too. In fact, I'm convinced they will.